Welcome to my class guide series for MoP. In this series, I'm going to give you an indication on how to play each spec in PvE so that you can achieve your goals. I'm trying out a new format of videos, so I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. Before we start, I want to make a quick disclaimer. First, the material that I present in this guide is based off my own research, calculations, and testing, and it's aimed towards beginner to intermediate players. I'm no expert on all of these specs, so you'll for sure find a more in-depth guide somewhere to help you in min-maxing if that's your goal. The PvE content is highly dynamic, and how you play your spec is going to depend on your groups, so it's impossible to define a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. Third, the material presented in this video is supposed to be a guideline rather than a recipe for how to play your spec. You should pick the parts which stand out to you and adapt it to your gameplay setting. If you disagree with any points or you have anything to add, make sure to drop a comment about it to help the other viewers out. So in this particular video, I'm going to talk about the Protection Paladin spec. I'll go through each spec of the class in a separate video and talk about two key aspects of use in each. The first being the standard rotations for single target and AoE scenarios. That will be followed by a utility usage segment which ties it all nicely together. Let's dive straight into it. The strength of the Protection Paladin lies in its ability to pop some great numbers while also bringing a tremendous amount of utility for your groups with cooldowns for varied use. In the first segment, we'll look at the core rotational abilities for the Prop Paladin and how these come together into a nice priority list. Since the Prop Paladin is a tank, our primary concern for use is going to be the survivability. So which abilities does the Protection Paladin have to stay alive? Our most important aspect of use is our active mitigation system. This comes from the Shield of the Righteous spell, which is off the GCD, so we can essentially use it on demand, and you'll use it as often as you can afford it, costing 3 holy power to use each time. When it's used, it hits the targets for moderate amount of damage and gives you a short buff which lowers your physical damage taken for 3 seconds. The baseline of this active mitigation is going to be at around 25% physical damage reduction, and it's going to increase with 1% for each percent of mastery that you have. So if you have 15% mastery, it's going to give you a total of 40% physical damage reduction. Your goal for this spell is to have as close to 100% uptime as possible so that you don't take physical damage outside of this mitigative window. Additionally, you gain a stacking buff called Bastion of Glory, which will help you in self-sustain, but we'll come back to that in a moment. We also have a pretty standard assortment of defensive cooldowns, which is going to be covered in the utility segment of this video, as they're not a part of our standard rotation, but rather they're used situationally. In order to keep our active mitigation up by the use of Shield of the Righteous, we also need to be able to generate holy power. So let's start off by taking a look at our single target offensive rotation. Apart from Shield of the Righteous, we have 7 damaging core abilities which will be used to deal damage and generate holy power, so we can use it on our holy power spenders. Our rotational spell list is going to consist of 7 abilities. The first is Judgment, which is a short CD holy power generator. Next, we have Crusader Strike, which is another short CD holy power generator. Both of these are going to generate 1 holy power when used, and are going to be used pretty frequently, as you'll see in the rotational priority. Holy Wrath is a spell which does high damage, split among enemies within 10 yards on a short CD. If the glyph of Focused Wrath is selected, this will instead deal high damage to your primary target, which is a strongly recommended pickup. Hammer of Wrath is an execute phase spell which causes high damage on a short CD, and its only usage is when the target is within 20% HP remaining. Consecration is an AoE spell which lasts for 9 seconds and deals low periodic damage to any target standing in it. We also have some different options from the level 90 talent rows, but for single target you'll be using Execution Sentence. It's essentially a big 1-minute CD which causes ramping dot damage on the target and will do some very high damage throughout its duration. Finally, Avenger's Shield is a ranged ability which causes high damage to your primary target and bounces to 2 nearby enemies. It interrupts casting, and when it's used, it's on a short to moderate CD. This spell is your most dynamic element to your core rotation since it synergizes with the Grand Crusader passive. This means that every time you dodge or parry, you have a 30% chance to reset the cooldown of your Avenger's Shield, and if you use it within 6 seconds, it also generates a holy power stack. Also, you can glyph into Glyph of Focused Shield to make it into a single target spell, dealing 30% more damage, which is strongly recommended for single target scenarios. So how do all these abilities come together to a rotational priority? In their most simple form, we can run some basic sims to get an idea of how much damage each ability does every time you press it. I've run the numbers using tier 14 Bisgear with some pretty standard settings. The result is the following, and it gives us an indication of the value that each ability brings in terms of damage when it's used. While this could be an easy way to construct a priority list, we also need to factor in the synergies with passive effects and resource generation. We've established that Shield of the Righteous is off GCD and should be used almost as often as you can to maintain high uptime of your active mitigation. This means that we can create a factored value which indicates how much a single holy power is worth in terms of damage when it's used. Looking at the numbers from the sims, we see that Shield of the Righteous has an average hit of approximately 150k and costs 3 holy power to use. This is going to give us an indication that each holy power is worth about 50,000 damage when you consume it. We can then take this value and add it to the abilities which generate holy power to give them a weighted value. This is going to account for the damage that they deal and also the resources that they generate, which in turn will generate more damage through Shield of the Righteous. So the result that we get is that Execution Sentence will still be the top contender and be your top damaging dealing ability in single target. Next, we got Avenger Shield, which lands at the second spot regardless of if you use it with the Grand Crusader, such that it generates holy power or not, and this will be your second priority in your rotation. Holy Wrath comes in at number 3 and is closely followed by Judgment at 4. Hammer of Wrath is your 5th priority and will only be available in the execute phase. Cumulatively, your consecration damage comes in after and should be used if possible at 6. At last, your Crusader Strike is your least valuable button and comes in at number 7 when it comes to damage output. This is the rough estimate of how the priority list looks in order to optimize your single target damage output, while it doesn't take account into defensive usage or anything like that. Next, let's take a look at the AoE rotation and how this might look on a priority list. Before you even start an AoE encounter, you'll make 3 important changes to your settings. First, you'll change your glyphs from Focused Shield to Double Jeopardy. This is going to give your Judgment a strong increase in damage done if you swap targets between each use. Second, you want to respec your Execution Sentence into Light's Hammer as soon as you go into any cleave-based encounter. Third, you'll replace your Crusader Strike with Hammer of the Righteous. The priority list is going to change like this, where your single target spell drop to a lower portion of the scale and your AoE favored abilities will rise. It's important to note that you should not spend any GCDs on Refreshing Consecration until it's about to disappear, since the value for each usage will be over the total duration and not if used on cooldown, since the size and variables will vary greatly from encounter to encounter. You should take this priority list with a grain of salt, since the priority will differ depending on how many targets you're fighting. With the DPS portion out of the way, we also need to factor in self-sustain and resource management. For these points, I've not made any calculations since it becomes a bit fuzzy at this point, but I'll logically analyze how this affects your rotation. First off, your self-sustain is pretty easy. You have 2 options. Either you spec into Eternal Flame, which gives you a direct heal and hot ability at the cost of holy power, or you don't, and then you use Word of Glory instead, which will only provide direct heals. Regardless, your Bastion of Glory buffs, which you accumulate each time you use Shield of the Righteous, is going to buff your self-heal spenders. Simply use these self-heals whenever you need to, instead of Shield of the Righteous, in order to stay alive. The important aspect of this is that you should not spend holy power on self-based heal if your active mitigation buff is about to drop off before you can use Shield of the Righteous again. Then we have the resources. The management of holy power is pretty easy. It's either going to be you spending 3 holy power on a heal or active mitigation and damage, but the important part is that we never want to overcap our resources. This means that if you have 5 holy power and you use a holy power generator, you're wasting the added value that the generator brings to the table, and this might affect your rotation slightly in terms of priority. What makes this manageable is, since both self-heals and Shield of the Righteous is off GCD, you can simply dump holy power before you're able to cap, but on the other hand, if you're struggling to keep 100% uptime on your active mitigation, all your generators will have increased value in terms of survivability. I'd recommend that new prot paladins move Judgment to priority 3 and Crusader Strike to priority 4 if you're struggling with keeping active mitigation up due to this factor. The self-heal portion is going to be a flexible addition to your rotation, which can simply replace Shield of the Righteous if needed without losing uptime on your active mitigation. Apart from our rotational priority, we only really have one big offensive CD, being Avenging Wrath. This is going to give you a 20-second window of 20% increased damage and healing. In general, you want to use this together with other offensive items such as Synapse Springs or unused trinkets, and also potions. It will be favorable to sequence together with Execution Sentence and Holy Avenger talents, but can be situational if the encounter requires a specific timing of bursty damage. Let's go over to the utility department. I'm not going to place these on a rotational priority list since it's going to confuse most new users. But instead, I'll list the utility available and I'm going to give an indication of when it might be suitable to use this utility. We previously mentioned that we have a pretty standard assortment of defensive cooldowns, which we're now going to go a little bit more into detail about. Our bread and butter defensive is going to be Divine Protection, which default reduces your magic damage taken by 40% for 10 seconds. If you use the Glyph of Divine Protection, you instead get 20% magic and physical damage reduction, and the spell is on a 1-minute cooldown. Next, you have Ardent Defender. Similar to Divine Protection, it's going to reduce all damage taken by 20% for 10 seconds, but it's on a 3-minute cooldown. Most importantly, it gives you a cheat death mechanic where any fatal hit will be prevented and instead heal you for 15% of your HP. We also have a standard wall type defensive, being Guardian of the Ancient Kings, which reduces your damage taken by 50% for 12 seconds on a 3-minute cooldown. In addition, we have a talent option called Sacred Shield, which places a buff on a friendly target for roughly 30 seconds. This buff will grant you a small absorb roughly every 5 seconds depending on your haste, and will be a nice extra layer of protection on you at all times. While it can be used on friendly targets, I would strongly recommend to use it on yourself at all times. Defensives are very encounter specific and when you should use them. But in general, your Guardian of the Ancient Kings should be used when you're about to take a big tank buster or high sustained damage. Your Ardent Defender can be used as a filler defensive, but the real value comes from the cheat death mechanic and is well suited for situations where you're on the fence on whether you'll live or not, for example for big tank busters or similar situations. Your Divine Protection will normally be glyphed to give a high rate of physical mitigation, but does have niche uses where it can be used without a glyph to negate big magic damage. This is more of a filler defensive and is less of a priority to hold for specific times due to its short cooldown. Finally, your Sacred Shield will be a 100% uptime spell, where you'll have it on you at all times if you can. Next, we can look at the externals for group content. First off, we have Devotion Aura on a 3-minute cooldown, which is going to reduce the magic damage taken by your entire group by 20% for 6 seconds. This is a situational cooldown, which will almost always be coordinated to be used at a specific time, depending on which encounter you're in. Another staple external for the Paladins is the Hand of Sacrifice ability. By default, it causes you to direct 30% of the damage taken by the allied target to yourself for 12 seconds, essentially giving them a temporary 30% damage reduction. This ability is incredibly strong, and it's further amplified by the Glyph of Hand of Sacrifice. When you glyph into this, it simply reduces the damage taken by 30% of an ally without transferring any damage to you. The spell has a 2-minute cooldown and it will be used very frequently in challenging PvE content. When you combine this with the Clemency talent, you can use the ability twice, which really puts the Paladin in a great spot for external mitigation. Another talent choice on the same row is going to be the Hand of Purity. This can be selected instead of the Clemency talent, and it gives you the ability to reduce damage taken by an ally by 10%, while it also reduces all their dot damage taken by 80% for 6 seconds. This spell only has a 6-second cooldown, so you can essentially have it up almost all the time. The biggest use case for this ability is going to be encounters where you have a very high dot damage spell which is applied to your raid members. What it does is that it essentially negates any heavy dot damage at almost 100% uptime if you use it correctly, and I would say that this is only for very niche uses, but it could be very helpful. Another great hand spell is the Hand of Protection. It's on a long 5-minute cooldown, but when it's used it makes an ally immune to physical attacks for a short period. The primary use for this spell is for situations where you can negate entire mechanics, or when you might need an aggro reset to force a target swap for specific mechanics. Apart from this, we have a variety of tools which are displayed on screen if you want to take a look, but since these are less impactful, I'll try to keep the video on the shorter side. As a short bonus segment, I'll briefly run through the talents and your stat priorities. The talents are on screen, and most of these are either utility or quality of life based and can be chosen freely since they're highly situational. Road 3 is going to favor Eternal Flame for more experienced users and when higher tier sets are available to us. Otherwise, I would recommend Sacred Shield since it's so easy to use. Row 4 is going to be Clemency all the time unless you're in a very dot heavy fight where Hand of Purity might be a stronger option. Row 5, Holy Avenger is simply the easiest pickup since it lets you open with high uptime on your active mitigation, and it's a very strong candidate for maxing your DPS output. However, Sanctified Wrath is a better option for DPS output in short fights, but will in general be your hybrid pick between offensive and defensive capabilities. On the final row, Execution Sentence is the best in single target fights, and Light's Hammer for AoE fights. In its most basic form, that's how the talents will affect you, but is very much subject to change and very situationally dependent. Your glyphs should contain the ones covered in the rotational guide, plus the addition of Alabaster Shield at all times. Finally, your stat priorities will heavily favor haste as a secondary stat, due to your Sanctity of Battle passive. This is going to be followed by Mastery, which further amplifies your Shield of the Righteous damage reduction in your active mitigation. Apart from this, of course you're still going to prioritize Strength over any other main stat, and you're going to make sure that your hit and expertise caps are met. And that's going to wrap up my Prop Paladin spec guide. This video is thrown together pretty quickly since I wanted to be out before the launch of MoP to gauge the interest of the viewers. If you're interested in similar guides for all specs, make sure to drop a like on the video and comment which spec you would like to see next. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on my future videos as I have a lot of plans for MoP. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.